Welcome to the Connecting with Coincidence radio show with Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD, bringing together the world's synchronicity experts to help you use meaningful coincidences to develop spiritually, psychologically, and practically. For more information, put Connecting with Coincidence into your web browser to find the book, website, Psychology Today blog, YouTube channel, and Facebook page. And now, here is the host of the Connecting with Coincidence radio show, Dr. Bernie Beitman, MD.
Welcome to CC with BB, Connecting with Coincidence. Meaningful coincidences challenge established beliefs. They suggest that we can be telepathic, that we can know the future, and have our own human GPS. Coincidence suggests that we are deeply connected to loved ones and to all humans and to all living things. Studying them uncovers the maps for these currently mysterious connections through our mental atmosphere, the psychosphere. I encourage you to sharpen your sensitivity to coincidences and to examine their potential uses and explanations. Read my book, Connecting with Coincidence, and learn along with me. Synchronicity, spoken here. Our guest today is James Williford. Jim experienced 6 months of severe obsessive-compulsive neurosis at age 23, accompanied by depression, leaving him with significant weight loss. This was followed by his first manic episode, which lasted 3 months. It involved waves of euphoria and a flow of new material into a keen consciousness. At the onset of mania, he was immediately immersed in the experience of synchronicity. His journey with synchronicity has been a two-edged sword. On the one hand, it was part of an oceanic experience where archetypal elements harmonized. On the other, it contributed to delusions involving other people, which he unfortunately acted upon. He became a psychiatrist in part to understand these experiences. The larger mystical picture he got to provided practical applications in his life, but the interpersonal delusions led to much pain. There was much synchronization between his mind's eyes, thoughts, and the external environment. What was most interesting was that there was a direct relationship between his expanded mood and the frequency of synchronicity. When mania occurred, the experience of synchronicity was acute, florid, and frequent. This predictable increase in the frequency of synchronicity across these mental states suggests that synchronicity can be studied under controlled conditions. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thank you, Bernie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Would you describe what mania is first clinically and then what it was like for you?
Well, the DSM over the years has provided a way to universalize communication between providers, and it typically will group a set of symptoms and make a reference to social or occupational dysfunction, and a certain duration is required to meet the criteria. The set of symptoms will involve racing thoughts, decreased need for sleep, pressured speech, engagement in, at times, activities to the extent that they are excessive. The energy is profoundly increased. When manic, not just mildly manic, will lose touch with reality, have delusions, grandiosity. And this can go on for a week to 10 days with treatment and still meet the criteria. Then,
just for our audience,
sure,
to make it a little simpler.
Yes,
it's some manic people describe it as being like endogenous amphetamines, like the amphetamine comes from inside. And it's
yes, exactly. It is like that. It's like being jacked up on caffeine to the 10th power.
Yeah, and that's a simple way of saying it, but it ends up a lot more. You don't sleep, you don't need sleep. Your mind's going really fast, and you come up with a lot of great ideas.
What happens? 3 months of only needing 4 hours of sleep a night, and being quite. I was able to, just due to my particular disposition, I was able to control my thoughts. I was able to edit what I said around different people. I was still aware that some of the people I was around might not like the deep philosophical ruminations, and others might, so I was, and again, it depends on disposition.
And that's so important what you're saying, because a lot of manics lose sight of their interpersonal context, of the minds of the other people around them, and just blurt out anything. But you still had enough knowledge of self and other to be able to know to whom to say what. Exactly.
Yeah, I did. I was in the military. I was enlisted, and I was an emergency dental assistant, worked at night and on the weekends, which gave me a chance to go to school. When I became severely ill on the depressive side, I had to pull out of any extra college on the side. But then when I became manic, I decided to enroll in a graduate level ornithology course, which was 1 week long. And I got an A in that. And I was able to comply with typical etiquette within the classroom, and also, on the job, working with Army dentists. They were on call for emergency problems. I was able to comply with military customs and courtesies.
Well, that's pretty amazing that you had enough self-control to do it. So where did it break down? Where did you have to finally say there's something wrong with me?
Well, what happened at the time, when I was flooded, the first day that I experienced any relief from the severe depression and severe obsessions, for about a half an hour, I put on some music and enjoyed it, some typical, up-tempo rock music. And then it slammed, the experience slammed shut. I was back in the darkness. The following day, approximately 3 a.m. in the morning, I was in the bathroom, and I had this, what I can experience is just an expansion of my mind's eye. And I describe the mind's eye as basically that faculty through which you might close your eyes and think of a nice tree with leaves and beautiful blossoms, of color, whatever, your ability to imagine a scene within your mind. That particular aspect of my mind expanded at least tenfold. It just filled my whole consciousness. That was the first thing I experienced. And then I began to notice that there was a relationship between the content within my consciousness and content in my macro environment. And that morning, this was going on for several hours. I was expecting it to stop, and I was going to be plunged back into darkness, but it did not stop. And I decided to listen to music. So the first album that I put on was Synchronicity by the Police. And
how did that happen? That's pretty funny.
Well, I just walked downstairs and I go, well, I feel like listening to music. The only music that I liked to listen to when I was severely depressed, and I mean like is very weak, was music by a Franciscan monk, John Michael Talbot. But at that point of that morning, I actually wanted to listen to rock music, and I thought, well, that new Police album, it's kind of strange from what I've heard, but I'll go ahead and put it on, because I'd only heard the radio stuff, a few radio tunes. So I popped that thing on, and all of a sudden, I'm just immersed in the synchronization between what I'm thinking and what I'm experiencing and what this guy's singing about. And initially, I thought, man, this is crazy. Initially, I actually thought that the singer knew me. And I thought that for about a split second. Then I said, well, that's bizarre, because my scientific acumen was still intact. So I then said, but wait a second. He's singing. The lyrics are about what I'm experiencing, because I was experiencing this synchronization between concepts in my mind and things that were going on in the environment. I could look around the room and see objects that resonated with my thoughts. And then, of course, once the lyrics started, in the other tunes, they were synchronized. For instance, there was a song that referred to reptilian imagery and the dinosaurs 50 million years ago, and I was all caught up in studying macroevolution and the dinosaurs and, the relationship between birds and evolution. So all of that stuff was just quite profound. I was compelled to go look at the album. I turned the album over, and I said, well, what kind of literature is this guy reading? He must be reading something. I found Carl Jung's name, Jung, and I decided that when I started my ornithology course, I would run over to the campus library and look Jung up. And when I did, I was just amazed at the types of at the walk that he had, the literature that he'd written, and how this stuff really made sense. And that was critically important for me because at that time, I was quite alone in my, epiphany, if you will. And to find out that I wasn't alone through this literature was extremely edifying. And that's probably enough about that.
It's enough. I think there's more, but we're coming to the end of this segment.
Sure.
That Jung was able to confirm that you weren't out there by yourself, and it happened through Synchronicity, the album. So you're listening to Connecting with Coincidence with your host, Bernie Beitman, MD, on the X Zone Broadcast Network, and our guest is Jim Williford.
Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Yeah, welcome back to CC with BB. We're talking to Dr. James Williford, a psychiatrist who had manic episodes which were very much related to synchronicity experiences of his. And what I enjoy about this is that I used to introduce this show talking about how the police brought synchronicity idea to the general public through their album, and then went and started talking about Jung. So you experienced those two right together in a way that I've never heard anybody do. And what you're talking about in your manic episodes is your mind's eye, that you would see things, lots of things in your mind's eye, lots of imagery, and that then you started noticing that imagery correlated with what's going on outside of you. And what I like about this is that I'm reading a book on parapsychology, the history thereof, and a line that just stood out to me about 20 minutes ago was a psychic who just kept reading mental imagery off of her mind. She was blind, and she could tell from this imagery and these words that came to her what someone's history was who was standing right in front of her. So this experience that you have had is something, and probably still do, is something that I'm trying to be able to help other people become more cognizant of, that we have the capacity to do in hopefully shorter and easier mind spaces what you just have described. And one of the things you described to me was about the comb incident. Would you tell us about that?
Well, during this experience of mania, I would not elicit nor try to conjure up these types of paranormal experiences that were separate but related to synchronicity. One time I was in a building at my workplace, and I had an impulse to comb my hair but had no comb. And then I immediately, in my mind's eye, saw a desk, knew where the desk was in the clinic but had never been there, never been in that desk. And inside I could see this yellow comb. And then I walked down to the end of the building, took a left, went into the room, opened the drawer, and there it was, same color, and I combed my hair with it. Often I would be experiencing conversation with somebody, and I would know what they were about to say. When these things would come on, they were just instant. It was like an instant knowledge. And I was very confident of what they were going to say. But the way I conceived it eventually was that simply I was experiencing a collective segment of the unconscious with this other person. Therefore, I was aware of the content and they spoke it, but it wasn't like I had any special kind of puppeteer line or any ability. I prefer to look at it as simply because of the expansion of what was normally unconscious into my consciousness, there was a plane within the unconscious that we were both tapping into. I was simply observing it. The other person was speaking it. And I would have that experience quite often.
Well, let's stop with a couple of things you're saying there.
Sure.
I think it's really very important from the way I'm trying to talk about coincidences and what they tell us, that the shared collective mind that the person spoke and that you could notice somehow. What is your experience of this collective mind? How do you understand that?
Well, it's I have found that some of the things, and again, this is a very common experience, but I've found that some of the things in quantum mechanics resonate with the way I look at the unconscious. And they're starting way back with books like The Dancing Woolly Masters and the Tao of Physics. There was this expression, tendency to be. Something having a tendency to be. And that expression started because people were noticing that these entities down at that level could be particles or waves, depending on how you set up the measurement. And so that there's a tendency to manifest. And I look at the unconscious like that. I think that there are these elements within the unconscious that I prefer to call progenitors, because it's a kind of an encompassing term. And that term encompasses archetypes and complexes. Complexes are personal. Archetypes are part of the collective unconscious. And they all have one thing in common. They have a pattern. They have a tendency to be a pattern. And so that Plato described the perfect triangle as existing within the mind, not out in the macro world, but existing within the mind. Well, in my mind, that would be a form of a progenitor. Now, these progenitors are down in there, and in normal consciousness, normal waking, they're repressed excellently. They're pushed down in there, and they manifest themselves facilitating activity within the macro environment. However, when you have some situation that disrupts the internal boundary, all of a sudden these progenitor-induced patterns begin to fly into your mind and emerge, and there's no accident that they resonate with the environment. And the reason that is because I believe when you are intending to interact with a person or an object, that intention is coupled with a pattern component that resonates with that object. It's a tendency, it's just an influence. It's not, the architecture of it is not like what we consider to be in the macro environment. It's a tendency to be an architecture. Now, that is the best I could do with that, Bernie. I apologize. I apologize for that.
It's okay. I accept your apology, because we're still trying to figure this out. What you seem to be saying is that having an intention activates a progenitor that fits, generally speaking, the object of your intention.
Exactly. Now, it can fit it either concretely, literally, or abstractly. You might find that there can be, in the relationship between the progenitor and the macro environment object, there can be a relationship where the analogy of one resonates with the literal of the other, or vice versa.
And sometimes it's approximate. It's not an exact thing.
Exactly.
It's close. Now, I had a funny little thing, which is a small thing. I was visiting a friend of mine in Philadelphia a couple of days ago, and her roommate came down and showed me a photograph of her grandchildren, and I said, I looked at them and I said, "Those are Lou's grandchildren." Now, I never met Lou. My friend had told me about Lou, and so I left it at that. I was lying on the couch in the living room, and she was sitting on a chair right next to me. Well, my friend and I went to get some coffee the next day, and we came back, and Lou was sitting in the chair where she had been sitting, showing me the pictures of the grandchildren, and she was sitting on the couch where I was lying when I said those are Lou's grandchildren.
Outstanding.
Yeah, comment on that, please.
Well, I think what's happening is that we see that when there is this relationship, sometimes it appears to be simultaneous, and sometimes it is not simultaneous from our perspective in the macro world. I think that the issue, if you think about the general theory of relativity, there's no such thing as simultaneity between two different objects in the macro world. They're always in different frames of reference because there's different gravitational tides. So that's not something that scientifically is foreign to us. And in the experience of the unconscious, you'll find that sometimes things appear to not be synchronized, but are so closely related in time that you're going, wow, that is a profound relationship. So sometimes we can recognize, wow, that doesn't appear to be simultaneous, but that's not foreign to us scientifically.
It wasn't simultaneous, but it was spatially
exactly
the same. It wasn't time; it was space.
Exactly, and if we look at space-time from the standpoint of the general theory of relativity, there is that important relationship. The other thing I do want to mention that I think is related to this is that they have demonstrated quantum entanglement across different frames of reference. So to give you an example, if you took two entangled particles, you put one in an X-15, flew it around the world at speeds that invoke relativistic processes, and you change the spin on one particle, the other one would instantly, or quote-unquote instantly change, as if they're both the same particle. In other words, there's a transcendence of space-time. They're in different frames of reference. Now, I believe that when as we go deeper into the unconscious, we will progressively transcend space-time, so that we will experience these relationships that have profound impact across space and time.
Yeah, and in this kind of regular world, where this happened with me, I was still in transition. I was about to leave Philadelphia to come back to Charlottesville, and transition seems to increase access to subconscious, unconscious activities somehow. I don't know.
I think so. When you have a disturbance of anxiety, there are many things that can affect a slight fragmentation to the unconscious at the internal boundary, and you will have a greater incidence of synchronicity. I believe that.
Okay, we're coming to the end of this segment. You're listening to Connecting with Coincidence with your host, Bernie Beitman, MD, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, and our guest is Dr. James Williford.
Broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond. You're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world, interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Well, welcome back to CC with BB, Connecting with Coincidence, with your host, Bernie Beitman, MD. That's me. And our guest is Dr. James Williford, psychiatrist, who has had manic episodes which have tuned him into synchronicity in a way that most of us don't have that experience, but we can back away from Jim's experiences and apply some of them to our daily life. One of the terms that Dr. Williford has used today is mind's eye, his mind's eye, the eye of his mind, by which he meant he can see things in his minds that are past, present, and probably future, in a way that we don't usually allow ourselves to think about. But because he could do it under a manic experience, it means that we have the potential in ourselves to do it. But what's interesting to me, I want to ask Jim about, is that he can observe his mind's eye observing things. And I'm fascinated with the ability to observe what I call our observer self with another observer self. There's more meta, more about, more thinking about. So, Jim, how is it? What facility allows you to observe your mind's eye in action?
I think that when we look at the default mode network in a resting brain, someone who is sort of reviewing their autobiographical history in their mind, looking back at their childhood or, good times in the past, that and people will vary as to whether, they do it in color or black and white in various, aspects. But that's what I'm talking about. And a person is not engaged in activities where they sense the environment with any of the five senses per se. There's no significant engagement with sensing or acting on the external environment. They are in a passive resting state. That's the default mode network. There are certain centers in the brain that are active under functional MRI at that state. And what they experience in their mind is just this image. It's not like an external image. It doesn't have that definition, but well, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes it does. Yeah. But if they, if you ask someone to conjure up an image, like let's just say you have a patient who is afraid of snakes, okay? And the first thing you want to do before you take them down to the local zoo, and again, let's just assume that in a perfect world, you could reserve the whole zoo just for you two, so doctor-patient confidentiality would not be a problem. Well, you don't want to take them down there for in vivo exposure therapy yet. You want to kind of gradually dip them into it. So you have them imagine in their mind's eye images of snakes there in your office, and you gradually build up the images to where they begin, and of course they relax. They systematic desensitization. They relax while they're exposing themselves imaginally. They're imagining. And then from there you move on to in vivo exposure. So that's the kind of for the average psychologist, psychiatrist, that's the faculty I'm referring to.
And that's a faculty that the psychiatrist is observing for the other person, for the patient, imagining the snake in various forms.
Right. So you have to depend upon the verbal report of the patient that they're adequately imaging.
Well, the psychiatrist is helping to guide the imaging.
Exactly.
And I'm talking about that your own internal capacity to observe your own imagery, to report it. That's not the same faculty as the images themselves. It's
correct.
That you can observe yourself observing these images.
Right. There is a sense of self throughout the experience. And, throughout all of my manias, and I do want to point out that my manias have been quite discreet. They have been circumscribed. I've had some blips of hypomania, mild mania, but the juicy ones have been quite circumscribed. They start and then they stop. My ability to my mind's eye, as we put it, throughout all of that experience, I am still aware of myself. I don't become like some people describe when they have oceanic experiences. I don't feel like my self has dissolved into nothing. I very much experience myself as intact through all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, but it is very much an oceanic experience, particularly the first mania. I felt connected with everything.
And when you talk about feeling that connected with everything and being aware of the feeling of being connected with everything, how does that experience and synchronicity itself fit into the process of macroevolution?
Well, yeah, that's an excellent question. And Marie-Louise von Franz was an important pupil and co-worker of Carl Jung. And in the book Man and His Symbols, the last chapter, The Unconscious and Science, she actually goes into this. And I actually read this, I guess, about maybe 3 summers ago was the first time I got around to finishing that book, believe it or not. And I was highly edified by this particular statement she made. And I'll just quote it. She states, quote, "Until recently it was assumed that the mutation of species happened at random and that a selection took place by means of which the meaningful, well-adapted varieties survived and the others disappeared. But modern evolutionists have pointed out that the selections of such mutations by pure chance would have taken much longer than the known age of our planet allows." New paragraph. "Jung's concept of synchronicity may be helpful here, for it could throw light upon the occurrence of certain rare border phenomena or exceptional events. Thus, it might explain how meaningful adaptations and mutations could happen in less time than that required by entirely random mutations." Now, that's unquote. Now, Bernie, the thing about this is the way she worded that, it almost sounds puppeteer and it sounds like exceptional events occurring along. I don't view it like that. The way I look at it is this. Within the collective objective unconscious, you have a deep matrix of progenitors. These are tendency to be patterns. They exist across space-time, and they provide for a morphological constant. They provide for a structure in collaboration with natural selection. You have the selecting environment, which itself is changing radically over time. You have the exposed mutations. They're the process of random mutation. And then through the collective objective unconscious, you would have a morphological constant that would help us not just be soup after 4 billion years.
It's almost like a wedding of these progenitors with the environment. So when the environment has a progenitor analog, the two come together and make that environmental thing into something that we would call real.
Exactly. I think the thing is, when I was heavily into skepticism and a physicalist, the way I learned macroevolution was
what's a physicalist for so our audience?
For a while, I did not believe that there was anything such as the soul or the spirit. I believed that things were particulate all the way down. Yes, all the way down. Okay. Now, then I was exposed to quantum mechanics, and then I had a renewal of my religious faith and belief in the metaphysical. Now, with that said, if you look, there are people that are going to look at it either from a panpsychism perspective, and there are people that are going to look at it from an anthropomorphic perspective regarding the mechanism that I'm talking about. But regardless, if you give yourself 3.5, billion years since the first nucleic acids, and you have a tremendously volatile macro environment with volcanoes, magma eruptions, all kinds of stuff, and you've got a tremendously mutating collective genome, after 4 billion years, you're just going to have soup. There's regression towards the mean statistically. What you require is some other thing that provides a morphological evolutionary influence, and that's what I believe the collective objective unconscious does.
Yeah, they're getting to the soup of regression to the mean. Meaning, describe regression to the mean.
Well, what happens when you regression to the mean is simply that a system is going to, when you have a huge amount of progression towards entropy in the macro environment, a huge amount of progression towards entropy in the molecular environment, with no morphological stability with another factor, you're just going to get soup. You're going to get regression towards the average state of what that would produce, in the middle of a bell-shaped curve. Now, the other aspects of the bell-shaped curve.
Now let's leave the bell-shaped curve because I love that concept, and I think it's an archetype.
Yeah.
You are listening to Connecting with Coincidence with your host Bernie Beitman, MD, on the X Zone Broadcast Network, and our guest today is James Williford, MD.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X-Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
Welcome back to CC with BB. And we were just talking with James Williford, a psychiatrist with a manic episode that introduced him deeply to synchronicity, just talking to him about archetypes and the bell-shaped curve. And I'm just a bit of a sidelight here, Jim. I think the bell-shaped curve, the normal curve, is an archetype as well. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that the bell-shaped curve is derived from faculties that are part of our, what you might call our macro disposition, which involves relatively slow speeds, relatively moderate masses, and involves reason and doubt. These are all things that are required to empirically evaluate an environment and come up with a way to predict norms and to categorize objects and processes according to the average versus non-average as you move out from the norm. And so if you take a group of people and say, well, what's the average height? Again, you'll get a in the middle of the bell-shaped curve. You'll get the average, and then as you move on out in either direction, you'll get 9-footers towards the right side, and you might get 4-footers towards the left side. But again,
you're saying that it's a property.
So what about that population? What about that population puts them within that pattern of where there's an average height? If you look at the system of macroevolution as described in pure natural selection, if you take the given volatile macro environment combined with the volatile collective genome, the average state you would have after all that time, predictably, would be soup. You would not be able to produce any structural entropy. There would not be, you would have high structural entropy, high structural, and that's just the average state given the initial conditions of that. Now, heat entropy, even with all the thermodynamic heat from the sun, and a massive sacrifice of thermal entropy, it still will not produce the decreased structural entropy that is needed to have all these nice complex morphologies in modern era. So what I'm saying is that the collective objective unconscious is in synergism with the selecting environment and that which is being selected to keep us from becoming that soup. Again, I think I'm sort of getting redundant at this point.
Yeah, you are, but it needed to be repeated. It's a complex set of ideas there, and my sidebar on this is what you seem to be saying about the bell-shaped curve, which I find a very interesting way of looking at reality. I've talked to statisticians, and one of them thinks the world is all statistics, and central to that is the bell-shaped curve as a way of understanding reality. We all need patterns to understand reality. Archetypes certainly help form our concepts and our behavior, And it seems to me that the normal curve or the bell-shaped curve is one of those archetypes that does not get paid attention to. But when the way you talk about it is that it's a quality of this dimension of slowness that we're in. It's not micro, it's not hugely macro. It's this dimension of 3D reality of human beings walking around with trees and other people where the normal curve seems to apply, but not necessarily outside of that into micro and macro worlds.
It's interesting that, I guess to discuss the etiology of bell-shaped curve would be, quite an in-depth discussion, but it's a great tool, isn't it?
It's a great tool. But I think we're going to go on to one other question. I think is we should pay attention to is back to your manic episodes. I mean, you're a real gift to the Synchronicity students because you're a psychiatrist. You're very articulate. You've learned a lot of stuff, and there you were not wanting to, but there you were thrust into a state of consciousness that coincidences, synchronicity, help ordinary people without these experiences get a clue about. But you were deeply thrown into them, and
yes.
From that manic experience, the state-dependent place that you got, you could see a lot more coincidences, and that led you to think that there are methods that could be applied for further research regarding synchronicity.
Yes, to come up with a loose equation, you might say that in my experience, the experience of synchronicity is both predictable and repeatable. It's directly proportional to the degree of manic mood state. Also, if you look at some of these studies coming out of Carhart Harris and colleagues, the experience I've had is consistent with an increase in the pattern entropy. In other words, all of the volume of pattern that enters consciousness is increased tremendously. So you have, instead of having one particular pattern to pay attention to, there's tremendous numbers of patterns, and that is consistent with what they're looking at with patients, or subjects, I should say, that are under the influence of psychedelics. They see an increase in this entropy, and for ease of communication, I'll just say pattern entropy. Okay, and then the other issue.
Increase in pattern entropy.
Right. If you're,
I don't know that entropy is the right word to use right there. Increase is the number of patterns is what you mean.
Well, when I first came across their literature, I didn't like entropy either. But for now, we'll set that aside because it can be a little misleading based on the previous conversation. But let's just say this: the equation would be mania is proportional to the increase in mood. It's proportional to the volume of patterns that enter consciousness.
Yeah.
It's proportional to the synchronization between those patterns and the environment, and it's indirectly proportional to a drop in mood. So when I become depressed, I do not experience it significantly at all. Okay.
Yeah. Now
this is repeatable.
That is really cool. I mean, I want to stick with this. We only have a couple of minutes left, but this is really cool because the increase in the number of patterns.
Yes.
I'm going to get rid of entropy in this because it's too confusing. But
let's leave that out.
And all this is proportional. Mood goes up, a number of patterns entering. Can you qualify the kinds of patterns that come in, not just with mania, with psychedelics? Marijuana does that to some people. Can you qualify what you mean, what kinds of patterns come in?
It's across the board. It's everything. Well, and of course, it's partially dependent upon empirical exposure. I believe that the world of the unconscious and the macro world exist in a reciprocal relationship. And, you know, I was a military brat, went to 6 different elementary schools, 2 different junior highs, 4 different high schools, you know, and just was exposed to all kinds of things growing up. And so that definitely feeds and then is worked on by the unconscious. There's a reciprocal relationship. In regards to experiments...
Wait. What you just said is the kinds of patterns that you see are correlated with the kinds of external reality experiences that you've had.
I believe that's correct, yes.
But then there seem to be some of these progenitor patterns that also get in there.
Correct. I believe that there are, you know, I'll have knowledge of things that I'm not supposed to have knowledge of.
Yeah.
And I'm not bragging, it's just jumped on me. You know, I didn't conjure it up. But in the middle of that, I'm also having delusions because I'm interpreting certain things as literal as opposed to abstract. You know, like for instance, I had these images of where I'd go to. I'd end up in a certain medical school eventually. Well, I didn't get accepted to that medical school initially, and then suddenly there was this transfer available, and I took it. Mm-hmm. But the way I look at the future is this. I like that probability distribution that you see in a particle in a box experiment in physics with the Schrodinger equation, because I think that the multiple futures are allowed for by concrete versus abstract interpretation. You know, I think that there's a problem with people that want to say there's a clockwork future. That's dangerous. So that's a whole nother conversation for another time. But getting back to experiments, you could take patients with subjective questionnaires, subjects with subjective questionnaires, with synchronicity questions mixed in. They are blind to the fact that you're focusing on synchronicity. You have them experience music with lyrics. You put them under functional MRI, and you use the Limpel-Zev complexity to look at the degree of pattern increase. And you also look at whether that correlates with a rise in the subjective report of synchronicity.
And we have to stop right there, Jim. Yeah. We've come to the end of this very intriguing ideas that you presented us with from your own research into your own mind. You've been listening to Connecting with Coincidence with your host, Bernie Beitman, on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, and our guest has been Jim Williford.
Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X-Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.